Hello, Daniel Castro. How's it going? And hello to GCIPICW7R3 PCT JEXXSB Q9Q equal equal. Yeah, right? Who might that be? Hello, Peter. Yes, is that you? That is you. Who is that you? Leia, thank you. Oh, that's good. How should we abbreviate that? So we just call you GC? um, Somebody else comes in with a different name all the time. I'm not, I don't remember how to change the name. Do any of you know how to change it? Peter, Daniel, do either of you have any idea? Oh, here, do this. So click over your name where you see our whole list and it'll say unmute or mute and more. Click on the more button and it's under there, rename. So I could actually do that really quickly. So I was able to fix that there. So yeah, if you ever are in doubt and you come in with some sort of code name, then you can always change it over there where you click more. Rename is in that space. And that's when you hover over in the participants window where the names are in there. Yeah. All right. I'm going to wait like 2 more moments here just to see if anybody else shows up, but let's go ahead and start with questions from you. It's kind of my favorite thing to do with all these classes, these Q&As, because it begins with you and I hope it ends with you because your questions lead to more questions, which leads to all sorts of answers for you that you feel good about until you go off and do your first drawing and then you're like, oh, damn, now I've got to put in mileage. But at least I get it now. So we are in the drapery class. For those of you who are new to all of this, what we do is each week you do homework, you turn it in, then I do a video review of your homework and give you pointers on what was wrong with it and where things can be improved. And that's mostly what the videos are for, is for improvement. There might be 10 seconds of compliment to the 7.5 minutes of this is what you need to do better. But it really is about that. It's all about improvements and trying to push yourself as far as possible with those improvements. And as you know or are aware, everything that comes with drawing has to do with repetition. So the more you practice, the easier everything gets. And I think it's easier at that point also for clarity of questions, like what do I need to ask you now? And you'll understand, because after having done 3 drawings, it's like, yeah, well, I can ask a question about the third one. But after 20 drawings, then you start seeing, oh man, why do I keep getting the legs too long or the arms too short or the head too big? Those are like legitimate questions now, because you're seeing through repetition the problems or the faults that you might be making. And that's what all of your questions are sort of alluding to, hopefully for you. And those are the things that I'm trying to get you to be more aware of that might help inspire a question or inspire the need for change so that you start fixing that particular kind of thing. Are we rendering this week, and what types of clothing should we use for the reference? I believe that this week is Greek togas or togas, because it's about, isn't this week like the first week of, Oh, I think this, I don't remember now. Just remember this. I made the videos 4 years ago. So I'm working on 4 years old knowledge, and I don't go through the videos. I just go pick up yours. So I think week one is more about, here's all the stuff we're going to do. Show me what you got. Week two, we sort of slow down and we go into toga mode. And what it's about mostly is following the instructions of how to wrap the lines around the forms so that you start really utilizing the cross contours, which is sort of like, remember in figure drawing, you're using the ellipses around the figure. And now you're taking those ellipses and you're contouring them to all the weird changes that the clothing makes. So they're becoming more than just an ellipse. They're now cross contour signals for you so that you know how to render. Because everything you're doing in here now, when you're dropping in the map, is getting you prepared for the rendering. Just like in the figure drawing, right? Those ellipses kind of help you. Those cross contours help you find the forms so that it makes it easier for you to shade, as you sort of kind of learned in the last week, where those ellipses change direction. Like if you had an arm and it's just a cylinder to start off with, and then you go to this, but then you put on the bicep femoris, and then you put on the deltoid, and you bring in the coracobrachialis, and then you also have like a semi-ripped person, so we see the difference in the brachialis, and then also we have to bring in the tricep, which is going to be a little bit sharper, or a little more relaxed but sharp because of the verticality. And now we have contours, but we need to know what the real contour is of the surface. Then we start doing this, right? And we start building around all of these while we're designing the structure so that it helps us with our shading. So like if the light was coming down this way and we knew we had edge lighting on the bicep right here, then that's going to happen there. It's probably going to happen in the same place along in here. Where's that edge lighting going to hit? And if we know that the brachialis is this and this and this, then we'll probably go, oh wait, it's not this one down here, it's this one right up in here. So both the top plane and that back plane are going to be in shadow. And then is there enough of this tricep visible to catch any of that light? And is there enough of this coracobrachialis to catch that light, right? And that's why those cross contours are really important, because they map out for you the different changes of elevation and the different changes of angle. And the changes of angle mean, in this case along here, everything in this space is core shadow, everything along here is direct light, everything over here on this edge is indirect light, everything along in here is probably a gradation towards reflected light, everything along in here is reflected light, everything back along in here is going to be occlusion, and then we come back out to something that starts getting into direct light again. The change of plane is your roadmap to how you shade, or later on, how you paint your forms, how you roll the forms around, and how you get everything to feel like it's transitional. And we didn't really get to do too much of this. I'm actually going to change the figure drawing format because I want this throughout the entire semester. So in the very beginning, you'll just be shading the simple cylinders. And as you move into the rest of the semester, it'll be more dynamically the human form and all of the muscle structure. But I think if we start that one earlier on, then there's a better understanding of what to do with it at the very end, especially for those who have really never done it before at all and need some kind of guidance before they go into Patrick's class. Because once you get into Patrick's class, it is about the rendering. And if you don't have rendering practice prior, then all you have is the technical stuff, and it'll take you most of the semester just to get to that point where you feel comfortable with it. So all of those different value changes along there are going to be the value changes of the shadow pattern. And then we know that indirect light over here is going to be a slightly darker value. I'm trying to grab one of these other ones to darken it down just a touch so that everything over on that edge now, it goes darker. Everything up along in here is a little bit lighter. And even that's going to change, but at least that's the starting point. I'm going to open up my brush and comb this edge with both of those values. And that's going to create the edge quality that we need for the rolling form. And then I'm going to move over into this edge to start creating the transition of the core shadow into the indirect light. And then I'm going to go to this edge along here to change the indirect light 1 to indirect light 2, which is more influenced by whatever light source or whatever object is over there, bouncing the light back into that space. And then getting back to the next occlusion to start rolling the forms again over the next muscle. And now I'm mostly finished, and all I need now are my vertical gradations. Where are the shadows darker in their reflections? Probably up there if down here is bouncing light in. And where are they darker in the lights? Probably darker down here and probably darker up along here because this isn't directly facing the light source. So now I have a new gradation this way and a new gradation this way to work with, which is usually the case because as we go further from the light source, things get darker. So that gives you all of the move and room for building your painting. And then it's just up to you to kind of screw along with the edges here until they become painterly or whatever they need to be so they don't feel so stiff to you. But that's an entirely different step. That's probably like when you do get to Patrick's class, that's what you should be thinking about, because that's about decorating your painting now with the appropriate brushwork instead of just thinking about the mechanical process of building it towards a form. Yeah. No, I totally agree. I'm going to go up because there's a few other questions that Leah asked, Peter asked, and then Daniel has a question about the armature. Yeah, wait until the very end for that. What types of clothing should we use for the reference? Just to finish Peter's question, those are all togas. So you can use costumes, like there's 3 things that I recommend you study from. And the first 2, I think, are the more useful. The first one would be from Greek and Roman sculptures, because they shoot pictures of those from the very top to the very bottom. You get the full figure. And do keep this in mind, everybody. There are no cropped photos. You cannot crop the photo. You have to use full figure photos every week, because this class should be called Figure Drawing with People Wearing Clothes. Really is what it should be called, because the ultimate goal of this class is not to understand folds per se. It's to understand how clothing fits on the human form. So it's figurative drawing with clothing and how the dynamic, how folds, because the 7 folds are because of people. We don't like make clothing for stuff like obsessive people might, like car covers and things like that. That's clothing for the car. But we're not obsessive compulsive to where we make clothing for our chair and clothing for our light and clothing for our Cintiq and clothing for our computer. We don't do that. So there's no other purpose for clothing other than just for people. That's really it. And the occasional humanoid or the occasional anthropomorphic, furry, or whatever we need it to be put on. But those are all human. Those are all human forms. So drapery is about how folds work on people. So you can't give me cropped people. You have to solve the entire pose. And then you're solving the clothing on top of the pose. And it'll all make better sense when you can see the pose from head to toe, because when you get a cropped photo and you try to make sense of it, first of all, you need to know what they're doing, because you won't be able to draw what you see effectively unless you know what they're doing. That's what gives inspiration to the folds that they have in their clothing. It's because of what they're doing. When you lift your arm, the folds change. When you drop your arm, the folds change. When you move your arm forward, they change. When you move it back, they change. When you move it slightly, they change. Everything is about us underneath. So you have to be able to solve the person so that you can solve the clothing. And that means head to toe poses where it's easy to understand what the person is doing. So that's important right there, number 1. Then number 2, now going back to where these 3 points of reference are, the first one is the Greek sculptures and Roman sculptures, because they always shoot them from head to toe unless there's a fancy article that needed a crop. And you would be working from head to toe. The second place to get them would be from movies like Rome and or what was The Gladiator, movies like that, where you have costume that is all about old school clothing. And I'll get to this in just a second. And then the third place, the less meaningful place, but the third place you can get this from are costume companies, and type in Greek toga costume or Roman toga costume, and you will get a heap load of cheesy looking photos of people that look like your brother and sister and mom and dad wearing Greek togas that shouldn't be wearing them at all, but are. And those are the last ditch resort pictures that I would go to, because most of the time they aren't very well photographed, and they're usually shot in a studio where the lighting is extremely bad. Which brings me to another point that I'm going to make here in just a minute about reference. But now going back to something else that I was going to mention, and shoot, I forgot what it was. So I'll go to that, the lighting. With lighting, you need the most natural lighting possible. Please, please, please avoid photographs of models being photographed in a studio, because those photographs are clothing ad photographs. For modeling clothing, it's not about the person, it's about the clothing that they're wearing. So fashion photography is about showing off all the clothing. If there's a shadow across the clothing, that's part of the clothing that nobody can see. But what's happening in that shadow? I can't see what's in there. It's too dark. Is there a button in there? Is that where the clothing changes pattern? You know, there's mystery. And so fashion photography is about revealing all of the clothing. So you're not going to get pictures that are very well suited for shading, because they won't have shadows. They're trying to get rid of them. What you want to try and find are pictures of people that are shot in everyday conditions. So this would mean going on like Flickr and typing in things like people jogging, people out in an outdoor mall, people watching a soccer game, athletes, soccer, rugby, outdoor sports that are played in the daytime mostly, not the ones that are shot underneath the stadium lights at night, because stadium lights are really bad. Those are even worse than fashion photography, because a stadium light is really truly trying to remove all the shadows so that the players have none. Because when you're playing a ball sport of any kind and there are shadows on the field, that makes it really difficult to judge something based upon a need to know. And since sports aren't based upon disguising things in the shadows, it's about revealing. Everything is revealed because of the bright light. And so that's what they're doing. So sports photography at night, probably not the best call. But in the daytime, you're going to get really good shadow patterns. And again, full figure. Anything full figure that you can do, but it's all about trying to first hone in on regular people doing regular activities. So maybe some of your word search activities would be like shopping at the mall, um, uh, museum tours, the Grand Canyon, you know, things where people are going to go because it's tourist attractions. So you're going to see photos of other people walking by or standing around a railing or whatever, but they're lit by the sun. And that would be the first place to go. If you know of fashion photography that uses high contrast lighting so you get good shadow patterns, then you can use that. But I would rather you don't use anything that's studio lit, because of the flatness that the fashion photography is shooting towards. Yeah, Cintiq sweaters. I have 6, one for almost every day of the week. I let it breathe on one day. Let's see. What were the other questions? I have a question about the armature. Okay. This week's was drop folds, diaper folds, and pipe folds. Yeah. Okay. So that begins so Peter, then this week is the Greek togas. And the reason, okay. So the other thing I was going to come back to was on this week's folds, the reason this week has togas and robes as a part of this is because we don't wear clothing anymore that have these kinds of folds in them. This kind of clothing comes from the ancients. This is like all toga stuff, right? Like diaper folds, or when your clothing drapes across your shoulder. I guess we do that now if you wear your sweater over your shoulder, or you tie a sweatshirt around your waist, you'll get some diaper folds from that, from hip to hip or shoulder to shoulder. But if you're not in the hoity-toity 1%ers, then you're probably not going to be wearing your sweater around your shoulders, right? So it's not going to be something that you're just like, oh yeah, that's right, I can do this. But you can find these things all the time in togas and robes and things that flow, gowns and that sort of thing. You can find diaper folds in capes. Like Superman from behind will probably, unless it's that stitched kind of cape across the shoulders, you'll find that there's a little bit of sway because of the cloth coming together between the shoulders. Um, and then the drop folds and the pipe folds, well, long dresses still have that. So you can find that in women's fashion. But for men, you don't see men wearing kilts and robes on a daily basis anymore. So the photography is less often seen of that sort of subject matter. And you're more likely to find it in costume more than you will in day-to-day wardrobe. So these would be places that I would be searching for your photos, and make sure again that fashion photography is not the thing. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that really quickly. So this is fashion photography, as you see in a lot of the photos that, like, you'll type in pants or you'll type in sweater. And like this one's actually a really good photo because there's a direct spotlight, but that's a rarity. And we know that we can use a dark and light spot because this doesn't have any pattern on it. We can see the stitching right over here. So we have one indication of where the stitch line goes, and we can pretty much see that this is a uniform body all the way around. So this is something that actually works quite well. This has good light and shadow patterns on it. But most of these other photos, like this one, this does have shadows on it over here, but you can't tell that there's shadows because there's also a big reflector over here bouncing light into that space so that she can reveal the clothing even though she's in a profile shot. And they're doing this on purpose so that you can see the shoulder up here because the shoulder is covered up by this whatever you want to call it, this pattern of material that's sticking up in the front. And it's showing off the stitch line and that there's a pocket right over here by showing how all of this material is adhered to each other. And it's also showing the slit on the side of the leg. So this one image would have been with several other images, but this is revealing the kind of quality of photography. So is this. This is fashion photography with a massive flash. There are no shadows on here, but we can see folds. But it would be hard for you to render because unless you know how to light and shade anything, and you've worked with everything, including photos that don't have much light on them, you're going to have a really difficult time with the lighting. This one is not so good. It is natural lighting to some extent, but she's also right up against a wall. This is purposeful. And this wall is bouncing light back on this side so that it reveals all of the clothing. And unless you knew better, you'd probably think that this is the shadow right over here along this side of the figure, when in actuality, the shadow begins right along here. This is the shadow. But this doesn't look like a shadow because it's all filled in with the bounce light from over here. So it's a lot more difficult to justify that as a shadow unless you know what you're looking at because you've rendered from life and you understand all those different nuances from life. This one is not so good either. It is shot outdoors. Her legs are really well shaded, and the lower half of her coat is well shaded. The upper half starts to fade into a brightness, which means there's a giant reflector over here just out of view, bouncing light back into her shoulder so the entire silhouette can be seen from side to side. And it has to do something with the composition because the dark line here lines up with the red band and everything above that is light and airy. And if there was a whole bunch of dark vertical lines in here, it would make the photograph look weird. So they muted those shadows on purpose to keep the photo looking sexy and keeping everything looking healthy and nice and contained. Here's a fashion photo. This one's not so good either though because it's shot at night when the sun has gone down. So you're getting warm light from where the sun is going down. So on the horizon line, but then the sky is this gigantic blue sky filter that fills in every inch of shadows. So all of this is the blue sky. And unless you can see the difference in temperatures and know where to separate the light from shadow, this would not be a very good photograph to work from at all. Oh, you can't see my screen. What? Oh man, I've been doing this whole time. Ah, damn it. I'm so sorry. So I also drew this bicep without you seeing it too. Ah, so I did all that plane work. Damn it. Well, that was what I was drawing when I was saying, and this and this and this and this. I'm so sorry. Oh my goodness. Oh, there's a lot of you saying something about the screen. I'm just looking at the questions. I wasn't looking at all those other. Sorry. Let's see. Question: should we be seeing the screen right now? Um, Armature and likeness of materials. So likeness of materials is going to come later on. When we get to week 6 or 7, we start going into velvet, silk, and cotton, and the week following is fur, latex, and I forget what the third one is. But yeah, we definitely go with, look, if it has anything to do with making clothing at all, this class covers everything. Any question you might have about anything regarding clothing, this class will have covered it. I don't know of any other drapery class like this one. This is the only one of its kind that gets this extensive. All the drapery classes I ever took, we just sat down and drew people from life, but there wasn't much to help us with other than like the occasional handout from a book that we all own anyway. And it was just to prompt us, here's something that you can look at while you're making these, but it didn't even explain like how to use those handouts. So it wasn't like I got any information that helped me do clothing better. And what I made sure of, like when I do any class, I want to make sure that you get the most out of it. So I try to design it where you can get the most out of it. That's why, like, some of the guys that are in here have taken my classes before, and they'll tell you that you do a lot of work. But you would be doing a lot of work anyway, because the subject matter requires a lot of additional wrist time in order to practice these things. But anything regarding material and how we wear it, you will have learned it by the end of the semester. There was another question up here. LARPers, yes, LARPers are also good. In fact, Ren fairs, any kind of photography that has to do with Ren fairs, that's good. Um, the costume fanboys and fan ladies of comic book conventions, all the comicers, those are also good. Although indoors, there's going to be a lot of overhead flatness because those convention halls are completely flat lit. There's like 5,000 shadows to every one person standing in there. So the indoor photos aren't the best, but when they shoot them outside, that's when you get some really good light and shadow shots. And I definitely recommend that in a lot of the semester, you do find costumes to work from every week that sort of fit the mold of what we're doing. Because if you think about it, all of you are going into some sort of conceptual design or storyboarding aspect of what you're doing. And it makes sense to step beyond the real world a little bit whenever you can. And, you know, it doesn't need to be that way every week, but when you get the opportunity to push it a little bit and push it towards things you know you're going to be designing quite often so that it starts familiarizing you with the subject matter that you'll be dealing with. So earlier when I was talking about shading and light and shadow and all that stuff, I was talking about the different bands of value. You can see that there's a change of value over here. You can see that there's a change of value through here. You can see there's a change of value through here. You can see there's a change of value through here. Nothing's erasing. Why isn't anything erasing? There. You can see a change of value through here, and then you can see a gradation this way through it, just like you can see a gradation up here from here and down here from up here. Those are the two different directions of form, and it's because of these cross contour lines that we've drawn that we can see that form. That's why those cross contour lines are so important. So when you're drawing the costume, it is important that you can see this whole idea of where you are on the surface so that you know how to shade it, because each step is about the next step. And this step is helping you go, all right, where the light, if the light's coming down this way, shadow's going to start right here and it's going to shade through there, probably right along here, and it's going to cast shadow through here. It's going to start right here. So those are the areas that you'll shade. You'll shade in here, you'll shade over here, and along in here, you'll shade over here. And then after that, you'll be able to darken this because you know that this is where the light and the dark meet. You'll do the same thing along here. You'll know that this edge and this edge are the sharpest edges, and this one over here, because those are the areas where their cast shadow is stopping. And the cast shadow is nothing more than this edge being cast over to that surface. And you'll know where to start this because you know where the turn of the fold is because you've mapped the entire surface out. And then you'll know along in here where to change the values subtly because you can read this edge very thoroughly because of its three-dimensionality. And then when we get out into the lights, it's the same thing. Oops, mask, why do I want mask? In the lights, it's the same thing. You'll know that across here is the brightest lit, and that when we turn even just slightly along in here, it starts to drop in value before it gets to the core shadow, which is going to have a value change right up against it. And we'll know that when we go in the other direction, that this is a change in value right here as it starts rolling away, and that this is a change in value right over here as it's continuing to roll away. So that's 3 different values along in here, 3 different values along over here, then the shadow pattern and the different values that are in there. And we know that the reflected light can't be anything bright like anything out here. So it prevents us from making mistakes in duplicating the values. It prevents us from making mistakes in describing the wrong change of form. All these values are going with the volumes that are along in here. So everything is form driven. And as I'm building this up, I'm relying upon these cross contours to kind of help me figure it out, because you can't just shade something flat and expect that it looks right. You have to know where the change of form is. That's why you study anatomy, because you're studying how the muscle structure changes direction in both directions, this way and this way, so that you can shade the human form without it looking flat and simple like a cartoon or a comic book. That's being too simple, and form has more dynamicism to it than that. And that's what we're trying to learn here. Well, hard surface is a part of, we don't really study armor that much, but I mean, if you used leather armor during the week when we're studying leather, then we would look at that. And if you used armor anyway on the costume, we would still describe it, but the armor is second to whatever is most important, because remember, it's about drapery. The armor, if you think about this, if you took, and I've just recently learned that you don't go through rendering in it, but it should, and I don't know why you don't, but if the sketchbook class were to take everything farther, you would render your forms out so that you have the understanding of what kind of surface you are working with. If it's something metal like, then your edges are going to have highlights on them along in these areas. And if it's diffused, they're not. They're just going to be really soft. But in hard surface sketching or hard surface rendering, that's where you're going to learn things like how to render armor, how to render a car, because when in there, you're going to be learning things like, actually, you'll learn it in here using the different material qualities, because the difference between silk and cotton is the difference between metal and flesh. It's like totally different. And we talk about all of that as far as the demonstrations and the critique goes, like how all of this stuff looks. But when you're doing hard surface rendering, you're really concerned about all these changes of direction, because each change in direction constitutes an entirely different set of principles to get the light to move across it properly. So if we are wearing something like armor and this is a sunny day and we're standing out there where the sky is like this to the armor, then we know that everything down here is probably going to be reflection or something that has to do with the ground below us, because it's a darker value. The sky is a brighter value. So we would have the sky light. And then maybe a hint of this edge along here, just next to the highlight, would also reflect a little bit of that previous surface that we were just looking at. But these areas here and here now are the catch light areas. That means that that's where the highlights are going to go. And we would need to know across that surface where the light is the brightest, meaning where is the turn of the surface the most extreme, so that we put the highlight in that one spot and let everything else darken from there in the light areas just as much as in the dark areas. Like everything has a gradation to it, whether it's lit or shaded. So then we continue on with the lit side and we go, okay, well, right along in here, we're going to light this, and up above that, it gets just a little bit lighter because of how bright the sky is. And then as it goes down this way, it gets darker than this one right here. And we have to turn that in value. And once we have all of these things brought together, then the only other thing we have left beyond that is which direction is the gradation. And everything has direction to it. So like with this, if it's rounded, and I'm going to do a cross contour, if it's rounded like this, and that's around here, right along in that edge, then everything is going to be darker over here. It's going to get a little bit lighter as it goes this way. It's going to be the lightest across here. Then it's going to start getting darker again that way. And then in this direction, it's going to be darker up here. It's going to be really bright right here. And it's going to start getting darker as it turns away from that brightly lit area. And if the sun is really bright and it's the thing lighting it, then somewhere along one of these apex points, we're going to see a perfect reflection of the shape of the light. It isn't going to be this big, fancy, blown out area. It's going to be really sharp and small and cut out. And that's going to be the same thing on every edge of every surface. We know those because we've shaded metal surfaces, glass surfaces, diffused surfaces, and we understand how each of those different shaded surfaces have different properties to the way that the highlight is accented. If we have a middle value object and we have a bright light like the sun on a really shiny object, you're going to see the shape of it. On something that's not so shiny, you'll see kind of the shape of it, but it'll be really blown out. And on a diffused object, not only will you not see the shape of it, but you also won't see the light of it, the brightness of it. You won't see how bright it really is. All of this is going to be a lot darker, and it's going to be totally blown out and spread across an entire surface area. And that's the difference between like a velvety surface, a metal surface, and a cottony surface. The highlights disperse and spread out differently. And that also is going to spread differently based upon which direction the form is traveling in. How much roundness does this object have to it? How sharp is the roundness, and blah, blah, blah. That's all a part of how you render all of these things. So all of that stuff is hard surface material. And like I said, we'll work on that a little bit, but we're not going to be like super into all of the technicalities of it. And then let me see back up here. Okay, I think I covered all the questions up to this point. Are there any other questions now beyond what I've just answered, all of those? And then while you're typing those in, for any of you who are new to this class, each week we turn in the homework, you get a critique. I ask of you to add any questions that you have regarding your homework on the homework. So if you're turning in 2 pages of homework, you want a third one, and that third one's going to be questions. And the reason I ask you to do this is that when we grab the homework to go critique it, it's in a zip file that we download all at once. We don't go from person to person and download each individual item. They're all queued into a zip folder, and it's all thrown together from your individual folders. And then when I go to post the video critiques back up, that's the first time I see all of your pages. So it's the first time I'll see your questions. And if you have a question regarding that week's homework, then make sure that it is included with what you turned in so that I can address that in the video, because I want to make sure the videos are 100% for you, meaning not only is it my critique, but it's also addressing things that you had problems with or that you had some kind of doubt about and you just didn't know what to do. No, when a fold is hidden by darkness, let me show you that too. That's a good question. And I don't mean to jump from one thing to another. If I didn't answer or finish that, let me know. And those are easy to see. Let's see. I want... Well, first of all, I'm not going to find it here. Let's go. I knew it was going to give me that full figure instead of full figured. Let's see. Portrait photo. A lot of portrait photos do that extremely dark shadow thing. Here's one right here. All right, so we're talking about folds, but it doesn't matter because what I'm talking about is photography and the screwed up things that happen in photography. All right, so this whole side is really dark in this photo. That's on purpose. It's part of the design of this particular photo that they want. And what you can do is you can take levels and curves. Either one of them will work, and slide your midtone and see how all the data of the photo is still in the shadow. So if I take the photo and I blow it out enough, I can open up that shadow pattern and I can see what's inside of it. And that'll give me all the answers that I need. If the photos that you're taking from the internet are old, like from the 1960s or 70s, that won't happen because those photos are scanned photos from a photograph that was photographed in another medium and then printed out on paper, then somewhere scanned along the way. So it's like 7 generations later from the original photograph. But all new digital photography will have all the data of the photograph, even in the shadows. So if you were to open up the light of the photo, it will reveal what's inside of those shadows. I'm going to turn this off and you'll see, boom, everything drop into darkness again. That's how much information I was able to pull. So that's what I would do. If you have one of those photos that's shielded by shadow, then go there. Because you really can't leave an area blank. That doesn't make any sense. And if the photo can't be revealed in any way, then just do your best at trying to figure out where you're assuming that to come from. Because quite honestly, I can label where every fold of your body is going to come from. Or every fold in your clothing is going to come from, because it only comes from so many places. So think about it like this. I'm going to get rid of this photo. If you think about the shape of the human body, we have parts that stick out a little farther and parts that go in a little bit. And it's the parts that stick out that become the influence of a fold. So anything that sticks outward is going to probably cause a fold. And then upward, each thing that sticks upward, like the acromion process to the acromion the chromium point, or whatever they call that little knob part of it, the process is out here. This is going to be one area where folds will begin. This is another area where folds will begin, because each of these has its own height to it, and everything with its own height or its own extrusion is going to be an influencer. Folds don't come from stuff from deep within. They only come from stuff that stick out, because the clothing is going over us, right? And so it's not going to like go, oof, you know, unless it's like spandex material, it's not going to stick to and conform to all of the parts of our body, with the exception of expandable cotton material. And a lot of guys now that work out and wear those types of t-shirts, the t-shirt does conform to most of the body, but it is because the material stretches. So it's easy to conform to undersides, where most normal materials beyond stretch materials can't actually turn under because gravity forces them downward, and the material's so stiff it can't turn back inward unless it's forced back inward. Well, Daniel, to answer your question about the invention thing. Oh, and yes, just above that, Leia, you do need to include your reference with your images that you turn in, because I can't give you an honest critique without knowing what you drew from, because it's the resource that has all the answers in it. And if you don't include that, then all I'm doing is second guessing everything that you worked on. Are you going to be inventing folds during the class? No, you will not, because there are not enough weeks in the here. Okay, you know what? I can answer that differently. Yes, you can, but you have to do it on your own, because there aren't enough weeks in the semester that warrant a week where we can just do invention. Every week has something technical that we're learning about. But what you can do is this: you can split your homework, or you can add to your homework, not split it. You can add to your homework by doing what you're supposed to first, and then do a couple from imagination and label them that way so we can look at them and try to see if you can match the understanding of what you're doing that week with something that you're inventing from, in addition to something that you've copied, because you can't invent what you don't know and what you haven't done. So after you have done the homework, you have done a few. Now try and invent a few and see if any of the information has stuck, and see if any of the information makes any sense to you when you're making it. I like that answer better, because then it means you can actually give it a shot. But just make sure that everything you do in here first comes first, and the invention stuff is when you have extra time. I have room for one or two more questions here, if there are any more. I'm not opposed to leaving the session early, but maximize your time with me by getting as much as you can. We don't necessarily do hats and accessories of that sort, like a hat, but we do, or watches, but we do socks and shoes and things like that. And what you'll understand with like a hat, if you take a hat off, if you have a hat near you, the whole part that goes around your head is nothing more than an ellipse. So what you need to figure out on the face is where by the eyebrows is the hat, and then draw the ellipse around it. And then you draw the other ellipse around that, and now we've got a big brim. Or if we need to, we find the center, find the center, find the center, find the sides, take the sides, mark the sides, take that back and mark it, so that you can then take the hat and turn it upward or downward, or whichever direction it is that you need to turn it in. So hats are nothing more than an exercise in ellipses. And so are everything else. Like a shoe, you put on a shoe on a foot, and it's nothing more than finding this over at this end, and then being able to expand on the foot size just a tiny bit and simplify it, and then expand downward and repeat almost the same shape, so you have a sole. Right, and that's all a shoe is. But yes, we do sort of talk about those things a little bit in here. You know what I can do, Daniel? I can go and dump all of your images. In fact, I'll just go do that right now really quickly while we're talking. I'll dump the images. So Daniel Castro, let me see if I can first of all. Can I? I think you would have to do it. See if you can throw your own images out. If you can, then you can replace them. And what I'll do is I'll go into the classroom right now. At least I can do this part. And I'm going to select all for everybody and allow for late submissions. That way you can go in there and you can mess with the file and see if you can throw out the file that you have and replace it with the new one. And I'll wait here just a moment and see if like you were able to. First of all, just right now, go see if you can throw out your file now that you have access to it again. And while he is doing that, if the rest of you have any questions to ask, go ahead and throw those. We don't need to be point by point on this whole discussion of how he needs to throw stuff out. You will normally get the video feedback videos right before we start class or roughly a little after. The problem with me doing your videos is I teach 2 different classes for CGMA and they're both back to back. I start my feedback recordings on Sunday night and do as many as I can after I'm done working. But then most of the rest of them I have to do Monday morning. So I get up like at 5:30 and start recording. And then I have to do my first class, which is at 10 o'clock. And then I do my second one at 11:30, which is you guys. So then once I have both of those classes out of the way, then I start posting, or I have already posted them just before doing them. So it'll be within that kind of a time frame. Oh, my schedule is stupid. I don't even want to explain the rest of my schedule. It's so dumb. I don't have any time for anything. And when I need to make time for something, I have to sacrifice things, which means that I'm going to have to double up on time somewhere else, which is just dumb. It's just dumb. Daniel, were you able to do anything? For the time being, okay, awesome. Yeah, go ahead and edit then. So when you know you need to do an edit on those, let me know and I'll open up the forum for you. All right, awesome. As far as the polka dot stuff and the question that you asked, Peter, about patterns and textures, save that for another layer and only do those when you know everything else is solved properly. What's important is that you see the form of the material and that you can judge and justify all of the shadow facets, halftone facets, light and highlight facets, and you can read the material like a crystal. Like you can definitely read every face on that material. And then you can apply the texture, because if you think about it, texture is perspective. So if you draw on a piece of paper and then hold the paper up in front of your face, you're seeing it flat. Hold that same piece of paper at an angle and you're going to see your entire drawing skewed, which means it's in perspective to your eyes. And that's exactly what happens with patterns. They change weight, meaning the thickness of them. They change their own angle or rake, like an ellipse. It's going to change because it's in a different angle to your eye. It would be a full circle and otherwise. And so those patterns conform to the surface and change to a varying degree based upon the change of direction that the planes are to the viewer's eye. Absolutely, like tattoos on a person, the same thing. And if you think about any pattern, like a picture, like if you drew a picture of someone holding a picture but not turned towards you, you would have to draw the first picture facing you, and then you would have to draw the picture in the picture facing away from you. So you'd have to draw the whole thing in perspective. So it's almost like a second picture because of the way that it's facing. Everything is skewed. But that's anything that's texture. Like the patterns, the spots and patterns on an animal on their fur. That's a texture. You would wait until later. Fur is a texture because if you squint at fur, especially tight-bodied fur, it's nothing more than a form. It's a texture as soon as you open your focus up and you can see all of the fur, but it's a form when you blur it out. And that's what you start with, just like hair. Hair is a blurry form. When you start with someone, like let's just say as an example, a crew cut for a military dude, right? You would have, even if it kicked up a little bit on the forehead like that, you would start the whole thing like if our light source is like over here going in this direction and the hairline was this, you'd start the whole thing off, and I'm going to put local color in there first. Local color is the color of the object. And in this case, it's local value because we're working in black and white, but this represents the color. So color equals value, and that's the local version of it. And then if I was going to be really smart about this, then I'd also turn that form before the light source, before I bring in the light source. So I would darken back here and probably darken a little bit of this over here because the light's coming down at an angle. That means the highlight's going to be somewhere up here. But anyway, going back to what we're doing here, light and shadow pattern, let me darken the hair in the back along in here. That means now that we have a powerful light because of how dark I made it. And then we have to roll the edge of the form. More than likely the hair up here is going to be dark as well because of the way the light catches in hair and fur because of its reflective properties and absorption properties. And then it gets a little bit lighter up through here. And then we might have a highlight right around in this space here. So we'll push a hint of that. And we have the hair mostly done. We also have probably a lighter edge where the hair meets the face somewhere along in here, which means the edge is going to be softer. And then we go around and go, okay, so in the front, I'm going to do this right along in here. Back here, I'm going to do this right around in here. I'm going to clean all this up too. And I'm going to do that down here where I know hair is going to kind of pull, and back over here where hair is going to change levels. And then along the hairline, I'm going to do a little bit right around in here and maybe along in here where it's closer to the viewer, where we can see things more. And as it gets closer to the forehead turning away, I won't as much because that's in perspective. And then maybe across the highlight, I'll cut in a few places with the darks, and I'll go beyond the darks with the lights. So it starts creating a little bit of textural noise in there. But see that little bit of texture in just a few places, how much the whole thing looks like hair just because of those few little marks. That's all the texture you actually need. You don't need anything more than that. Anything more than that, like if we start going, okay, hair, right? It doesn't look like hair anymore. It just starts looking really noisy. And there's also perspective to it. So out here, we'll see the contour in its true form. And through here, we'll be looking into it like circles. So it won't have the same textural needs because of its change in perspective. It's either away from us, towards us, so that's looking through it, or going away from us again. And that's perspective. That's the whole like array of different angles that we're going to see hair at. And that's the same thing as velvet. Velvet is like hair. So as soon as we learn how to make velvet, we've actually learned how to paint hair more appropriately because it shares the same kind of textural quality. Any other questions? As soon as I start talking and saying see you later, somebody types in a question. So I'm just giving a little bit of breathing time here for you to be able to type it if you have one. If you don't, you can also say don't have one, and that's all good. Then I know that we're not going to be getting any more. But anyway, as I usually say at the very end, any last minute questions, so you can ask them before we part ways. And if you don't have any, but you know you need to ask a question, you can always email me and you can ask it as well. And for the rest of you, take care and have a great week. Good luck with the homework this week. And homework will be posted up within the hour. So Leah, within an hour, you will have everything that you need. I've got to go start posting things up, and it takes time for everything to upload. Once I have 6 things uploaded, the 6th thing takes like 45 minutes, where the first thing will just kind of hurry up and go. So it's all in a queue getting pushed. All right. Have a good one, everyone. Take care.